Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack a fascinating, truly paradigm-shifting 2017 paper by Mihailides, Galligan, and Bates. We're going to investigate a genuinely provocative idea today: how everyday, completely normal people, just like you and me, are fully capable of collectively ruthless behaviors. We're going to look closely at the cognitive mechanics that make this possible, and honestly, it might just completely change how you view human nature. Now, right off the bat, I want you to ask yourself a slightly uncomfortable question. Are we all a little psychopathic? Because usually when we hear that word, we immediately picture a true crime documentary or some Hollywood villain, right? But what if that instinct isn't an anomaly at all? What if it's actually a built-in survival tool hiding inside every single one of us? For decades, the foundational assumption in psychology was that psychopathy is a deficit of a broken brain. A biological lack of fear or empathy, mostly found in criminals. But our source material proposes a radical new view. They argue that psychopathy is actually a normal, adaptive, state-shifting feature of the human mind. So in other words, it's not a glitch or a clinical defect. It's a dual processing feature that we all possess, and it serves a very specific evolutionary purpose. To solve this mystery together, here is our roadmap. 1. Rethinking the psychopath. 2. Psychopathy in normal society. 3. The empathy quarantine. 4. An evolutionary targeting scanner. And finally, 5. Testing the new theory. Let's start with part 1, rethinking the psychopath and moving beyond the broken brain. To understand where this new theory comes from, we really have to look at how science historically viewed the psychopath, because the field was actually quite split. Back in 1941, Hervey Cleckley introduced work showing that psychopathic traits had highly functional adaptive features. The McCord sustained this view in 1964. But then, by 1980, Robert Hare shifted the focus heavily toward forensic criminal populations. The literature basically became obsessed with criminals and their supposed biological deficits, kind of just ignoring how these traits manifest in the normal population. Well, that is until this 2017 paper by Mihailides and colleagues hit the reset button to bring the focus back to everyday humanity. Which brings us to part 2, psychopathy in normal society and the paradox of collective ruthlessness. Taking a macro-level view of human behavior using a concept called meta-ethics, we can step back from our own cultural biases and objectively observe how human collectives operate. And honestly, it's often quite ruthlessly. Consider these socially sanctioned behaviors. From governments approving covert surveillance laws and legalized abductions, to populations experiencing angry vindication at death penalty viewings, to apostasy laws, all the way up to intercultural wars and massive genocides. The authors point out that in all these events, we see the exact same objectification, callousness, and cold-heartedness found in clinical psychopaths. The only difference is that here, it is operating on a massive, collective scale, fully sanctioned by the society engaging in it. So, by applying moral relativism, we realize something truly chilling. What one culture views as completely barbaric, immoral, or psychopathic, like certain extreme apostasy rules, another culture's moral majority views as perfectly justified and necessary. One society's psychopath is quite literally another society's social norm. This proves that psychopathic cognition isn't just a clinical defect. It's more like a psychological dial that entire cultures can collectively turn up or down based on what they believe is necessary for order. Moving on to part 3, the empathy quarantine, how we turn off our humanity. Let's zoom in to the micro level of the brain to solve the mystery of how a person can be incredibly loving to their own family, yet totally sanction ruthless acts against others. The authors introduce an incredibly powerful concept here called vector quarantining. Basically, this is a specialized, domain-specific mental zone that effectively isolates and shuts off empathy toward a specific target, without destroying the person's overall capacity for empathy. This completely dismantles the old idea that empathy and psychopathy are mutually exclusive. It proves they can actually co-occur. You don't have to lose your overall humanity to act psychopathic. Instead, your brain creates a highly targeted quarantine zone. This dual processing capacity happens in a very distinct sequence. First, your normal empathy is operating just fine. You love your kids, you care deeply about your friends. But then, step 2, a territorial threat is detected. Step 3, almost instantly, the magic trick of the human brain happens. Your empathy is quarantined away from that specific threat. And finally, step 4, psychopathic cognition. That cold-heartedness and objectification activates directionally, aiming only towards that target. You are essentially Dr. Jekyll to your in-group and Mr. Hyde to the thread. Okay, part 4, an evolutionary targeting scanner, sweeping for threats. Let's dive into the evolutionary psychology behind why our brains developed this chilling mechanism. The source text explicitly describes psychopathic cognition as a targeting scanner. Evolution designed this mechanism to constantly sweep our socio-cultural environments. It just operates quietly in the background, scanning for potential dangers, looking for any shift in the environment that might threaten our survival or our way of life. And when that scanner detects what the authors call a risk phase transition, essentially an invasion of our territory, a chain reaction occurs. The territorial incursion happens, which immediately triggers an innate survival threat. In response, our state psychopathy levels spike. Now notice the emphasis on state instead of trait. This is crucial. It means our psychopathic levels are dynamic. They naturally surge during times of threat and recede during times of peace. But what exactly constitutes territory to a human being? Well, the triggers for our targeting scanner aren't just literal, like physical borders, land, and food. They're just as easily activated by incursions on our symbolic territory. This means our state psychopathy can spike when we feel our socio-sexual rights, our spiritual laws, or our cultural freedoms are being threatened by an opposing group. This beautifully explains why cultural or ideological conflicts can so quickly strip away empathy and replace it with extreme organized hostility. Finally, part 5, testing the new theory with the moral inversion method. Theorizing all this is one thing, but how do we prove it? The researchers propose a brilliant experimental design called the moral inversion method. First, they gather ideographic data, which basically means data highly unique to you, the individual. They ask a participant what they personally find to be the absolute most corrupt or morally heinous behaviors imaginable. Next, they introduce an imaginary invading culture that perfectly embodies all of those exact traits, essentially creating a simulated territorial invasion. Finally, they measure the spike in the participant's state psychopathy. They are testing to see if the participant's empathy naturally shuts down and if their own cold-heartedness activates against this imaginary alien culture. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. We've seen how psychopathy isn't necessarily just a clinical disorder, but an adaptive quarantine zone in the normal human mind waiting for a trigger. So ask yourself, what perceived threats to your beliefs, your values, your symbolic territory would activate your own targeting scanner? Under the right survival threat, who might you place in an empathy quarantine? It's a heavy question for sure, but understanding it might just be the key to understanding human nature itself.